Yeah. So, thanks for the intro. And I guess as Claire pointed out, we've got our next meeting all booked up with speakers. And I guess a theme you're probably going to get used to is sort of big banks talking about big things, big projects, open source, which is all very, very interesting stuff. I actually wanted, as this is our very first meetup, I thought I'd start really, really small. Big banks, big projects is my day job. I don't really want to stand up and talk about my day job right now. I want to talk about some of the more personal things that I do. So for me, open source has been just as much a personal endeavour as it has been a professional endeavour. I guess it's led me to ask myself this somewhat rhetorical question: why do I spend so much time working on open source? Which is, it's good to ask yourself questions every now and again. I sat and had a think about it. It wasn't anywhere near as pretty as that. It was actually just in my living room. And I came up with a number of really good points, and I wrote them down, and there were 7 of them, which is always a nice number. And I could just tell you those 7 points, but to be honest, I found it more interesting thinking about my journey towards learning those 7 things about open source. So I'll share those 7 points with you, and you can write them down for yourself. But I want to tell you a little bit more about my own personal journey. And a common theme throughout all of it is about sharing of creations. Open source, to my mind, one of the most fundamental things about it is it's the sharing of things that you create. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So for me, it started quite a few years ago with the discovery of computers. And this was the very first computer that I ever laid my hands on. I'm going to ask a question. Who knows what this... No! It's a BBC. I don't think you can tell whether it's an A or a B unless you lift the lid. But
the A's died quite quickly. No, it's got 3 colours. It's got 3...
Oh man, we've got some proper... Oh right, okay. Yeah, fair enough. You've blown me away there. So this was a computer that was commissioned by the BBC as part of a computer literacy project. And it was a fantastic creation, and people of a certain generation will have remembered going to school and there being computer rooms with wall-to-wall BBC microcomputers in a lovely cream that kind of faded to yellow over time. I was lucky enough to have one of these things at home, and also every month, this would drop through our door through the post, the Bebug magazine. I don't know if anyone else here ever got Bebug? No, okay. It was, at the time, it had a real kind of fanzine feel to it. It didn't have a very high distribution. Now, recently I found that someone has scanned all 100 or so copies of the Bebug magazine and posted them on the internet, which is pretty amazing. And I vaguely remember writing a letter to Bebug magazine quite a few years ago, and I thought, I wonder if I can find it. It took me a long time to find it because they haven't used OCR or anything. These are image scans, but I eventually found it. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it out for you. It starts, "Dear Sir," because I was very well brought up, and I can't see on my screen. It says, "I've beaten the high score in Hedgehog. My score was 3,080. I like your magazine because it has lots of good games. Colin Eberhardt, aged 8." Yeah. To be honest, I was kind of hoping for something a little bit more insightful that would kind of point to a future career in software, but there you go. It was my score in Hedgehog which was beaten. But
the response is brilliant.
Yeah. Actually, I was top of the high scores in Missile Command for a number of months running, and I'm going to find those high scores. Anyway, much more relevant. A lot of the Bebug magazine looked like this. It was source code, and the reason why it was full of source code was because at this point in time, this was the primary way for sharing your creations with a wide number of other people. And yes, you could have them on cassettes, but to distribute to a significant number of people, you distributed them as source code. So for me, this was a very immediate experience of learning how computers work and how to share your creations. After I grasped some of the basics of programming, I moved on to my next computer and moved from sort of discovery through to creativity. So I'm going to ask the same question again. Who knows this one? It's a Commodore Amiga A500, and this was the first computer that I actually owned myself. It was an amazing machine, multitasking, had 4,096 colours and a weird kind of graphics mode called ham graphics. We can go into details later on. But the interesting thing about the Amiga computer especially, and the Atari ST and a few of the other computers at the time, is they fueled an incredible amount of creativity. A lot of people with the Amiga and the Atari just wanted to make pretty things, make funny sounds. There was a lot of creativity, and there was a lot of sharing of these creations through floppy disks in public domain. So as it says here, public domain software is software that's been placed in the public domain. It has absolutely no ownership, copyright, trademark, or patent. Basically, you created something and you said, here you go, world, you can do what you like with it. And the stack of disks there is basically the distribution mechanism. I had a drawer that was packed full of these things. And to be honest, public domain was a bit like stamp collecting. People wanted to get the whole collection of Fred Fish. That was one of the public domain collections. People wanted the whole collection. Funnily enough, piracy of games was rife at that point in time. People were copying them like crazy. I think mostly people were copying the games so that they could get their funky demo on the front of it. People weren't doing it to actually get the game. It was as a distribution mechanism for their demos. And again, you know, I released some public domain software. I couldn't actually find it. It was called Doctor Strange Music. You know, I was a teenager. I don't know why I was doing that. The review says, the VU meter and volume indicator is also very nice. Good disc. Great. After that, I moved on to a different type of computing, and my motivations changed to money. At that point in time, I went to university, and money was a bit scarce. Didn't have tuition fees in those times, thankfully. And I went there as the universe, as the internet, which is kind of the universe, was really kicking off. I had my own GeoCities website and so on, but I quickly realized, like many other people, that the internet is an interesting platform for making money. I didn't invent PayPal, but I did have this website, and thanks to the Wayback Engine. And at that point in time, there was a thriving economy called shareware software. You can see at the bottom I had a few free creations. Some of them were screensavers, which were basically rewrites of the demos that I used to write on the Amiga. Another one was very popular within a little clique, Virtual Juggler. It was a 3D juggling simulation. The world needs one of those. And the top one was a thing called Mosaic Magic. At that point in time, photo mosaics were very, very popular. Photographs that were composed of lots and lots of little photographs. So I thought, I'll write a tool that allows people to create their own, distribute it as shareware, charge people £15 for the unlock code, and I was able to pay my rent at university through this little creation, until the guy who owned the patent found out, and then that stopped. I had no idea that was patentable. As it progressed, the next step in my sort of experience with sharing software was around sharing building blocks. As the things that I created became bigger and potentially more significant, I needed bigger building blocks to construct them. So again, using the Wayback Engine, this was one of the first websites I created back in 2006. I should probably tell you, one of my weird hobbies is I'm a bit of a juggler, which is why there's a bit of a juggling theme going on here. But I created a website called the Internet Juggling Database, all programmed in PHP. And I had people volunteer to translate it into 11 different languages. I had integration with news at the time, came through a thing called Usenet News. Some people may remember that. It was a chat forum that was outside of the internet, so I brought it into the World Wide Web. And this is when I created my very first open source projects. So this was PHP Headliner, a PHP tool for integrating Usenet News. This was PHP Site Translator that allowed me to farm out the translation of my website to a team of enthusiasts. And whilst I didn't get a lot of people contributing code, I did get quite a lot of people raising issues and feature requests. This was my first experience of collaborating with a wider community. Following on from that, this is the first collaborative project that I undertook. This was a chap called Philip Sumi, who used to write blog posts and articles for a magazine that I also wrote for, and we decided to team up and we created our first kind of collaborative open source project. It was quite exciting creating a project with someone that I never actually met. And funnily enough, that's something that's repeated itself a number of times. Now, since then, I've become highly active in GitHub, and I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow account of every project I've been involved with since then, because we would literally be here all night. But through GitHub, GitHub has now become, personally for me, my primary mechanism for sharing, but the same themes have emerged. I've worked on open source projects with a number of people I've never met before. I've open sourced my own projects, and others have contributed code, contributed feedback, and they've helped me to improve my own creations. So I'm going to go back to the original question, again, asking myself, why do I spend so much of my time working on open source projects? And I think through looking back at my sort of history with computing, I'm able to better answer that. And as I mentioned, I've got sort of 7 points. I've boiled it down to a few key sort of facts from my personal perspective. The first one is very much my belief that software development is a craft. And if you believe it to be engineering or art or otherwise, I'll agree with you to a certain extent. But for me, foremost, it is a craft. And the interesting thing about crafts is people enjoy pursuing them and building skills for no other reason than the pursuit of the craft itself. Whether you talk to someone who's into painting or otherwise, some people just do it because it's fun. Others also have a lot of joy through sharing their creations as well. And I think most people who are in software can understand those two motivations. Sharing them, you get that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling of someone else using your code, sharing your creation. So with that in mind, here are some of the things that I believe really make me enjoy working with open source software. The first one is it keeps my skills fresh. These days, I spend quite a lot of my day job in meetings. I'm not going to be rude about that because some of the people I spend meetings with are in this room. So I won't be rude about that, but I do spend a lot of time in meetings. A good thing about open source is it gives me the opportunity to practice what I believe to be my craft. I can maybe in between meetings or on an evening, I find reality TV great. When the kids are watching I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here or whatever else, I can write some code. It's cool. I get a bit of peace. It also encourages me to expand my skill set as well. If I'm doing something open source, I can pick whatever technology I want. So if I want to pick something new and shiny, yeah, why not? I'll go ahead and do that. Next up, it teaches me about people. This really is an interesting one. As I mentioned, I've worked on open source projects with a number of people I've never met. I've worked with people before video conferencing was around. So we communicated via email, or back in the day it was things like ICQ and Yahoo Chat and so on. And it teaches you a lot about how to interact with different people. It teaches you to be respectful of differences of opinion. It teaches you to understand language barriers and social differences. And also, I guess on a flip side, it teaches you to focus on the important things. And by that, I mean not code formatting. That's not important. There are much more important things than some of the trivialities that sometimes get in the way of collaboration. And on a similar note, it makes me a better communicator. And what I mean by this is I've experienced trying to contribute to other people's projects. And what you very soon realise is most open source projects are run by people who don't have as much time as they would really like to spend on that project. So what that means is if you want to join that community, if you want to make a contribution, you have to communicate very, very clearly and concisely. Why am I proposing this change? Why is this an issue? What benefits will it bring? Because I can guarantee you, if you don't clearly communicate yourself, they'll not have time to enter into a dialogue. So it does really teach you to communicate better, and that gets you a long way towards collaborating with other people. Again, this is probably an obvious one. It makes me a better developer, and yeah, I can see some of you in the room are doing exactly what I do at this point in time. You're going, what language is that? Yes, it is PHP, and I'm not going to have any shame in that, because I guess another thing that as a tangent, one of the things it's taught me is don't be snobby about technology as well. I think that's a very, very slippery slope. I don't use PHP these days, and I must admit I might joke about it sometimes, but I should probably remind myself that I learnt a lot when I was writing PHP in 2006. And yeah, it certainly makes you a better developer. If you're doing something in open source, obviously your code is in the open. And what that does is that really focuses your attention. You think a little bit more about design and test and documentation. If potentially the world of the internet and everyone's eyes can be on your code. I'm not saying they will be, but there's the potential there. You think twice about what you're doing. It makes my own creations better. Now this, I think, is probably what most people believe to be the primary promise of open source. If you create something, put it out in the open, then loads of other people can come along and contribute and make your creation better. As a bit of a reality check, you've got to actually have really quite popular open source project to have a significant investment of other people's time. But it does happen. In my own experience, I tend to get a lot more people contributing thoughts and ideas and bugs and issues to my open source projects. And again, that's a reminder that contributions are not all just code. There's a lot more you can do to contribute to a project than write some code. And that, again, that makes it quite accessible to all kinds of different people. And so on that note, don't be afraid to invite feedback and invite contributions, and also on the flip side, provide feedback to others. Actually, just the other day, I was using this is a bit of a tangent. I'm quite into WebAssembly at the moment, which is a fairly new technology, and I'm trying out some of the new tools. And there was a guy trying to persuade me to use his testing tool, and I was saying, well, I use this other testing tool. Why should I use your one? He said, oh, well, mine actually, it compiles to assembly scripts, so you don't have to do this compilation process. I went, oh, that's really cool. Why didn't you say that on the README? If you'd have said that on the README, I might have actually used it. And again, my feedback to him was, you've got to clearly state what your project does, because it's really cool. And that links quite a few of these themes together. The next one is, it teaches me the value of small things. I'm very much a believer in the value of small things, because with open source, these small benefits can be multiplicative. And I'm glad I managed to say that. One thing that you often find yourself doing is, as a developer, is wasting time. And sometimes we spend far too long just trying to get a thing to work that should work. And then we go back and we look at the instructions and go, oh, well, that was misleading. I'm on Windows, they wrote it for Mac, or it's just plain wrong. And at that point in time, you can just, you fix the problem for yourself. You can move on and go about your job. But if you spend another 5 minutes, you can go back and fix the documentation or fix the example, and you'll save someone else an hour, and someone else an hour, and someone else an hour, and it kind of snowballs. So whenever I see an issue or a problem, no matter how small, I'll definitely go back and change it, even if it's just a one-liner on a piece of documentation, because small things do have a big impact. And then this is the final one. I must admit, this is a little bit of an odd one. It makes me better at marketing. And you wouldn't generally expect that when you're talking about writing open source code. But what I have found is with sites like GitHub, the internet, and with so many people working on projects, it can be a real struggle to get yours noticed. If you want to create a successful open source project, you have to invest the effort into marketing it. And I certainly don't mean flashy websites, jazzy, spinny graphics, or anything like that. It's real marketing is about explaining why you created it, what problem it solves, what benefit it brings. People quite often forget that. They think that everyone else's context is the same as theirs, and they'll instantly recognize the value in what they've created. That won't happen. You have to explain yourself. So yeah, that's my kind of 7 reasons why I love open source and spend probably far too much time working on open source projects. Hopefully that's inspired you to get involved, either by maybe open sourcing some of your creations or collaborating in other open source projects, or just as a little reminder to make those small changes, those small contributions that make things better. Again, maybe it's encouraged you to practice your craft, because as I said, I believe software development is a craft, and I can have an argument about with the people who think it's science over a beer. If you've got any questions, observations, or simply want to maybe share some of your reasons for loving open source, then please do. Thank you very much.